Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, we head to Brazil, a country with one of the highest femicide rates in the world, which is why women's groups are worried about the government's desires to ease gun laws. Plus, how digital technology can help make cities safer for women. We'll be talking to Australian academic Dr. Nicole Kalms about her pioneering research on the issue. And we're also looking at a new safety app in Japan that's become popular among women as they tackle the problem of sexual abuse on public transport. But we begin in Brazil, where human rights groups estimate that 4 women have been killed each day so far this year as a result of gender-based violence. The country has one of the highest femicide rates, with most women being murdered either by their spouses or ex-partners. It's also why the far-right government's push to ease access to arms is a major worry for women's activists, as our team on the ground reports.
Every day, this team visits abused women at their homes, where sometimes they face death threats from relatives. This young woman filed a complaint against her ex-companion, but she's still afraid for her life and her children's.
Do you still go outside?
No, I don't do anything alone anymore. I lock myself in.
Since taking office in January, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has made it easier to own firearms in homes.
I'm very scared to become another statistic. Women die every day. I'm absolutely against these decrees.
But government supporters see carrying arms as a solution to violence.
As a woman, I'm pro-arms. I support self-defense by arms. An unarmed woman has no choice but to die. If she's armed, she can kill her attacker and defend her life and her children's lives.
Experts, victims, and women concerned by violence attended a forum on femicide in Duque de Caxias, where specific patrols have been set up. Police Commissioner Fernandes is worried about the easing of access to arms.
Without a doubt, a gun is a tool that will make it easier for the abuser to finish off the victim. During an argument, the attacker, without thinking about the consequences with the gun nearby, can easily grab it and shoot the victim.
Despite a 2006 law increasing the penalties for perpetrators, the number of murdered women continues to rise. Brazil ranks 5th in the world for the rate of femicides.
Now, we've talked on this show before about gender discrimination when it comes to urban planning and design. The safety for women in cities, especially at night, is a global concern. But in the Australian city of Melbourne, an online interactive mapping tool is being created to indicate the safety or unsafety of various locations. The tool allowing participants to mark locations throughout the city as being either safe or unsafe. Joining me in the studio is Dr. Nicole Kalms, the architect of the tool and an associate professor in design and founding director of Monash University's XYX Lab in Melbourne. The lab specifically researching gender and place. Thanks so much for coming in, Nicole. Let's start by talking about how this mapping tool actually works.
Well, it's actually quite straightforward. So it's a geolocative mapping tool, which means that women can really specifically locate experiences that they're having in cities. And this is very different to the way that we presently gather data, which might be around postcodes or larger regions of the city. So this is really drilling down and talking about, as you say, safe and unsafe experiences. And we're getting really, really accurate data around these particular experiences.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that Melbourne keeps being nominated as the most livable city in the world by The Economist and other publications, yet safety for women is still an issue. So what sort of trends have emerged from the data you've been gathering?
Well, I think, it's really interesting because I think that safer cities and livable cities is really interesting only because it's only looking through one particular lens, and we're not using the lens of women to think about how we perceive cities. So the kind of trends that we're seeing in the research that we're doing is around particular typologies of spaces. So things like public transport spaces are particularly unsafe, and of course sexual harassment on the street is enormous. And this isn't just around Melbourne, it's lots of cities that we've been surveying across the world internationally.
And that's something, again, that I can refer to my own experience as a woman. When I was living in Sydney, there was a pub at the end of my street, and I basically would take a detour every evening after 6 p.m. because I just inherently knew that it would be unsafe to walk past. And these are sort of strategies that we as women, regardless, as you say, of where we live, we all employ, don't we?
What you're describing is something fascinating, and this is the ways that women are excluding themselves from entire areas of cities. And this is what the map has been able to capture, is that there's a geography that women internalise of places in the cities where they just won't go, or they take extreme care, or they never go alone. And this is really important to help us understand how to plan better and make cities safer.
And that then begs the question, what do you do in order to make a city a safer place for women?
Yeah, well, I think that, my background is as an architect and urban researcher, and so people assume that it's going to be particular kinds of buildings or material things in cities. But actually what we're starting to do with our collaborators is to really think very carefully about how we communicate expectations of behaviours, how we think about how we don't only look for forensically for the ways that we might describe or understand women's safety. So at the moment, for example, safety cameras are everywhere in cities, but these are only useful after something really terrible has happened. So we're trying to think about preventative measures that we can use to help women.
Can you just expand a little bit further about some sort of preventative measures that have been found to be successful?
So in the UK, for example, and with regard to public transport spaces, the police in the UK developed a whole communication campaign, so posters around expectations of behaviour on public transport and the unacceptability of sexual harassment and what to do if you were sexually harassed. And this both increased reporting of sexual harassment, but then in the long term, it decreased the sexual harassment occurring on public transport. And it's not simple, but it is quite simply a communication campaign and following up on women's reporting. So I think that's a great example.
And another thing that keeps coming up in conversations we have as women is lighting.
Of course, yeah.
And so, what can be done in terms of town planning, in terms of ensuring that we do feel safe at night?
So we've collaborated with Arup engineers, and they actually analysed all of the really bad hotspots in Melbourne. And they discovered that actually these really overlit spaces, these are really unsafe for women. And so there's a very...
That's really interesting.
Yep.
Why?
So, well, because I always say that overlit spaces feel like a horror film. And you would know this, that very bright white light doesn't make women feel safe at all. And the Arup people have been able to identify a range of lux level that is able to really make women feel safe. But it's also about being able to read faces and to not have areas of blackout when you're walking through large cities' spaces. So it's actually really careful and very nuanced, and this is going to change policy in Australia.
Are there any cities anywhere around the world that are getting it right?
So the case study that I always refer to is Vienna. And in Vienna, they've had over 20 years of gender mainstreaming, which is where we think about cities through the lens of all genders. And Eva Kale has been a champion of that project. She's an urban planner, and it's quite simply about lighting, as we've just talked about. It's also about access and making sure that all forms of ability and disability can access areas of the city. And it's about mobility, so making sure public transport spaces and places are safe. And that's had enormous long-term impact.
The large part of the problem, though, isn't it, Nicole, that this area of urban planning and design is still very much dominated by men. How are we going to change it? Is it simply about just waiting for more women to enter the field, or how do we in fact make sure that everybody understands the need to change what we do?
So my thinking is that it's not just enough to put women into those elevated leadership positions. Of course we want that, but we actually have to understand that we're designing for women as well. So it's not just about the profession, it's also about including the everyday lived experiences of women in the processes of design. And so what we do is we actually bring women and girls into contact with architects and urban planners to really help them to think about what it is like to be, for example, a 15-year-old girl in a city, or indeed an 85-year-old woman in a city, because we need to understand those experiences. And that's a core part of what we're doing at the XYX Lab.
Nicole, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, as we've just been talking there, technology can indeed be crucial in helping public areas become safer for women. Almost 2 decades after the introduction of women-only train carriages, female commuters in Japan have taken to using an app in order to tackle molesters on packed rush hour trains. Maud Julien has the story.
Tokyo, the most densely populated city in the world, 31 million residents and a remarkably efficient network of public transport. 10 million people use it every day. Inside the trains, all looks quiet and orderly, yet so many cases of sexual harassment are reported each year that every woman seems to have been a victim.
I often feel someone touching my butt.
Once someone caressed my back. 1,750 women reported being molested last year. The country's police has developed a cell phone app to try to help protect them. It activates an alarm message in one click.
There is a molester. Please help. Please help.
It's super useful when you're being harassed.
This app is great. There are so many cases of groping. In the country's biggest cities, it's easy for ill-intentioned men to blend into the crowd, and the €4,000 fines aren't enough to dissuade them.
The profile of a molester is basically your ordinary guy. Men who have studied, who are married, 30, 40 years old, white collars.
This isn't the first time Japan's authorities have taken measures. The country's been running women-only carriages during rush hour for years. I feel safer in these women-only sections.
What's good about these compartments is that even when they're packed, no one bothers us.
According to Japan's authorities, over 2/3 of women between 20 and 40 years old have been molested at least once in public transport.
And that's it for now. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, that of course being France24.51%, or do send us a tweet at _51%. So until our next show, bye for now.